Five, four, three, two, one, hack. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining our Flawless Execution webinar series. This month's webinar is how to create high-performing sales teams. We're going to discuss how continuous improvement and aligned vision and disciplined execution will accelerate your sales team across all sales roles and, most importantly, to your customers. Now, we always leave time for questions at the end, so have your questions ready in the chat or the Q&A box on the screen, and we'll answer any specific questions that you may have. We start off every one of our presentations with this startling statistic. Companies achieve only 33% of the things that they say they're going to achieve. So this is from a great Harvard Business Review article where they tracked a bunch of publicly traded companies, and they measured what they said they were going to do versus what they actually accomplished, and they accomplished what they said they were going to do only 33% of the time. So that gap is what we call the execution gap. That missing 67% is what we help companies to minimize. How do you achieve what you say you're going to achieve? Let's talk about that from a sales point of view. We were asked to work on a new product launch in Europe. And one of the big challenges that they're facing with this product, it was the product that they're hedging their bets on. It was launching well in the United States. It was launching well in Asia, but it hadn't really caught traction in Europe. And they had weak sales in Q1 and Q2 of 2015. The root cause, once we did a debrief with this team, we brought all the country managers in from this $26 billion company, all the functional leaders, and we found out that there was misalignment across these groups. In other words, they said they were trying to sell it, but at the same time, they were much more used to selling the previous products. It was a lot easier to sell that last transactional product that they had. They were more comfortable with it. They knew the sales cycle. They knew the point of sale. They really didn't have use cases yet developed in Europe, and so there was a big challenge to stay aligned as one core group. So the key lesson learned for this team was to create an aligned plan with buy-in from all the different countries and all the different functional groups along the way. So we implemented that plan, and the result was in Q4 of 2015, they were able to triple, and more than triple, their sales pipeline and revenue. Case study number 2, we were called in to help out with a company that had year-over-year sales that had flatlined. This was a company that was worried that maybe their product had matured, maybe they were just in a maturing market, but whatever the cause, their sales had flatlined for the past 2 years. They really just stayed exactly the same year-over-year and hadn't had much of an increase as they were hoping to see. They were investing in it, but they weren't seeing an increase. And so we had a goal of helping them to support a 10% year-over-year monthly sales increase. The result? They only got 8% year-over-year monthly sales increase, but they were ecstatic. I mean, they said, hey, we shot for the stars, we hit the moon, no big deal, right? We got our 8%, that's exciting. Well, we weren't happy with that. We did a debrief and determined that the root cause was that they had weak merchandise demos and few client references. The lesson learned for this team was they needed to create merchandise demo videos and share 3 key client references with the entire sales team along the way. And what's the whole point of this? They were able to take those lessons learned and turn that into 15% year-over-year sales increase in the next month. And that's a simple, kind of intuitive change, right? And that's really what it comes down to for us. Using plan, brief, execute, debrief, determine lessons learned, we want to iteratively improve your sales teams, your sales individuals, and then your sales organization as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Joel Neeb. My call sign, my nickname is Thor. And for the past 17 years of my adult career, I flew as a fighter pilot and a trainer pilot in the U.S. Air Force. For the past 4 years, I've been working with Afterburner, and I'm the president of Afterburner. I went to the United States Air Force Academy. I graduated, went on to fly fighter planes and escort the president across the sky, and then got my MBA from the University of Texas about 5 years ago. Last year, I was embedded with a Silicon Valley tech company, helping them to connect their strategy to execution in their $26 billion enterprise. The way we do that is the same way that I manage complexity in my highly complex, dynamic world that I came from of flying airplanes. And you're saying, what does airplanes have to do with being in the business world or being on a sales team? Well, let me put it this way. I was flying in a world where I had the clouds whizzing by me. I'm going 2 times the speed of sound. I've got a couple of 24-year-old wingmen that I'm trying to stop from running into each other. I've got 350 switches and dials in front of me, and I'm trying to figure out, with this complex universe, that I've got in front of me, how do I distill this into the few things I can affect right now to be effective in my mission, to be safe in my mission? And those few things, those 2 or 3 things are the key things that we as a team, myself and my wingmen, needed to focus on. But your world is not that different, right? I mean, you've got a lot of products you can sell for your organization. They're like most organizations we talk to, you're saying, hey, it's not for a lack of opportunity right now that we're challenged by our goals. It's that we lack focus. It's that we lack prioritization. Hey, I can sell the last product really well, but now you're asking me to create pipelines for all these new products. I don't quite know who the point of sale is for those, and I'm not as comfortable with the sales cycle and everything else that goes along with positioning this in the marketplace. Not to mention that, if I'm being honest, I don't really feel like the marketing team is supporting me the way they need to. I feel like R&D is dragging their heels. And what we come up with is in your complex world, there's misalignment as well. And you can apply the same techniques that I use in my world to manage that complexity with simplicity. The way we do that is the flawless execution cycle. We plan. We create alignment up front. We brief that plan so we can kick off the mission. During the execution phase, we create a means of updating the plan because no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And then ultimately, we debrief. We talk about what went well, what didn't go well. We leverage best practices, and we eradicate mistakes. So what does that mean in a sales environment? Well, if you're like most sales teams I know, then you live almost exclusively in the execute phase. Matter of fact, some of you right now are thinking to yourselves, every second that's going by is a missed opportunity for me to go out there and sell, for me to go out there and have a cold call, for me to go out there and send that email to the client. And I'm going to challenge you and say, if you do it more deliberately, if you plan up front and create alignment, if you brief, and then most importantly, you debrief, you can become 10 times more effective and yield the benefits that I'm going to share with you in a moment. So what does that look like? What is success in sales planning? Do we really need to plan? I mean, at the end of the day, isn't it a matter of just going out there and executing? Well, in the sales planning role, I want to clarify roles and responsibilities around a shared, aligned sales vision. And I don't mean just around my sales team. I mean around the entire organization. Here's a common challenge that we hear. This comes from a VP of R&D, so not somebody that's in the sales part of the organization at a med device company. And this person said to me, hey, we're not going to release this new product for launch until it's perfect. We're still working on cost-cutting measures in production. And the sales teams and the marketing teams are screaming for this product because the market's ready for it. And the R&D side of the house is not quite aligned because they've got some KPIs that they're trying to manage and keep expenses down. And it almost looks like they're dragging their feet. But at the end of the day, what's happening is there's misalignment because they're siloed. And you can fill in the blank with the marketing team or any other part of the company that's not in complete alignment with the sales group. So the trick is, how do you create alignment within your sales team? How do you create alignment cross-functionally across the organization? Do you really need to? Well, most organizations we help out, and I know the ones that are listening to me right now, you're very tactically capable, meaning you're highly intelligent individuals, you're good at what you do, and as an individual, you're doing something, and I bet the something you're doing is something you're doing pretty well. But sometimes we feel like these arrows, and the arrows are pointed in all different directions. Where your marketing team is going one way, R&D is saying, hey, we're working on cutting costs. Marketing is saying, we're getting ready to present this to the market yesterday, and the sales team is saying, we only want to sell our old product. We're not excited about selling the new product. And so even if the CEO has a strategy of launching this new product, say it's a new med device, into the market, well, he doesn't have the alignment that allows that to take place because we're all tactically focused. We're all focused in our own silo. And what happens when each one of these arrows moves? The organization goes nowhere behind it. What if we could create that alignment up front? What if we could have a shared common vision for what success looks like so that R&D team would see, hey, we got a sense of urgency here and maybe we'll accept some increased expenses right now just so we can kick this product out and get it out in front of the market. So that the marketing team sees we really need to support the sales team so they can position this and be as effective as possible with this new product that the sales team is unfamiliar with. And we can keep that alignment so the entire organization can now move collectively in the same direction. That's called strategic alignment versus just tactically focused. So here's the keys to the planning phase. This is what I challenge you to do when you plan with your teams. First of all, when you plan with your teams, whether that's just your individual sales team or the entire organization to go tackle a new sales goal, I want you to bring all the stakeholders to the planning session. And you're saying, yeah, but Thor, you don't get it. We're remotely dispersed. We have 12 people over in Asia. We have 5 over in Israel. Our warehouse is in Europe. I can't bring all those people in all the time. And I'm not asking you to. The only time that I want you to get all those folks together is during the planning phase. And that's because it's critical for you to establish that buy-in and that alignment and see those nonverbal cues and be sitting across the table from each other so you're not alt-tabbed and looking at something else or looking at your phone and checking emails while the discussion's going on. You're face-to-face with each other because it's in that planning phase that you're going to build the alignment that's going to carry you through into the execution phase. Once you're done planning, I don't care if you never see each other again during the entire mission. I don't care if you do every single conversation over WebEx, over Adobe Connect, or even just over the phone after that. You can be successful from remotely dispersed locations after you plan, but you got to plan together. Next up, identify leading indicators for success. So a lot of teams want to hang their hats on, well, what's our quarterly goal? What's the number that we're going after? That doesn't get anybody excited. The last company we talked to, we said, what's your big strategy for the team? And they said, well, we want to go from 2% NOI to 4% NOI. And I said, that couldn't be any more boring to me. I couldn't care less about that if I worked for your company. You need to sell me on what we're building. What should I be excited about? What's the future look like at this company if we achieve that goal? Don't just tell me the numeric, the number that's going to set us up for success. And then tell me what the leading indicators are for that success. What's the pipeline that we need to create to be successful? What are the behaviors we need to instill in order to be successful? And then finally, create clear objectives for the group. You think in a sales organization that the objectives would be pretty clear, right? I mean, hit my quota, hit my numbers. You'd be surprised how often even sales organizations have no idea what their objective is. We just completed a round of debriefs with an incredibly successful, mature sales organization, and about half of the people that we talked to had no idea what their goals were. And they even shared with me that leadership didn't give them their goals until about halfway through first quarter of this year, and then still held them accountable for those quotas. And I know that happens not just at this company, it happens all over the place. So we have to set clear, measurable, achievable objectives for the entire team during that planning phase. So you planned your mission, you briefed it, it's time to go out there and execute. Let's talk about how we execute as an effective, high-performing sales team. What does that look like? You need to create a culture of disciplined execution that emphasizes clear advancements for every client interaction. We want to execute flawlessly. We started with a great plan. We started with alignment. Now let's turn that alignment, that inspired alignment, into disciplined execution. Here's one of the big challenges that we run into. This individual said, the VP of sales at a top tech company, he said, we don't have a sustainable cadence because we are so end of quarter focused. We end up in a blind sprint at the end of each quarter, and that means we have horrible forecasting and revenue projection metrics. And if he's being honest with himself, they kind of pride themselves on that. In other words, they get to the end of the quarter and they like to beat their chest and say, look at how I stayed up 5 nights in a row. I closed all these deals. I came sprinting across the finish line, and I was just under my quota for this quarter. But guess what? They lost all predictability for their forecasting. They have no idea what the revenue is going to be until the last 3 weeks of the quarter. And so they don't have a streamlined, sustainable execution rhythm. And the reason they don't is because they're not focusing on leading indicators for success. They're not focusing on pipeline in Q1, or in week 1, rather, of that quarter, and then continue to assess those leading indicators as the quarter goes by. So here's the keys to the execution phase. Make the data clear and simple. We did a debrief last week with an individual who's just crushing it in his sales role, and he's leading a great sales team for his region. And the rest of the teams aren't doing quite as well, and we said, what is your secret to success? And he said, honestly, I don't go for the 25 different versions of the Salesforce dashboards that I can build out there. And I've seen those before, and that you can get into some great granular data. But folks, one thing we're not lacking right now is access to data. Most of us are drowning in data, but we're starving for information. So make your information that you share clear and simple with your teams. If you want to go after pipeline, make that one metric. Don't even talk about the 7 different stages that it could be at this point. Just focus your team on that one clear objective. Once again, ensure that you're looking at the leading indicators for success and not just those things that end up on the P&L, that end up in the quarterly report. because the score will take care of itself, as Coach Bill Walsh says. If we do the right things right up front and we have the right behaviors, and as for leading indicators, then we're going to see the right sales at the end. And then finally, create a sustainable execution rhythm and stick to it. I was talking to that same individual, and I said, well, what's your key to leading your team effectively? It looks like your behaviors are all completely standardized. Everybody does the exact same thing. And he said, you know what it is, Thor? I set clear expectations with my team. We have a weekly meeting, and I never cancel it. I said, well, what do you do? You never cancel your meeting. I mean, isn't that common sense? And he said, honestly, no, because we're traveling. We're remotely dispersed. I'm over in Asia. Sometimes that means I'm up at 3 a.m., and I'm dealing with team members that are 12 time zones away. And so I'm challenged to always hold this session, but I never cancel it because I know it's that important for our organization. That's the heartbeat of execution for us. And that's the same way we treat our XGAP sessions. If you run missions with us, you know that we never cancel the weekly update because we need to keep the team's situational awareness and the credibility and the rhythm going so that they're confident that they can execute this together. And finally, debrief. Debrief your team to identify the best practices to share with the entire group. Debrief your team to identify the mistakes that are being made so that you can eradicate those mistakes. What does that look like? Well, success in sales debriefs means you're effectively capturing, and then there's an important part, you're transferring those lessons learned. You're not just hoarding them to yourself, you're giving them away to create a continuous learning, improvement, and best perpetual pipeline. So here's one of the common challenges to a sales team debrief. We're talking to the senior vice president of business ops at an enormous company, and I'd identified something he was doing really well. And I said, hey, this is great. You need to share this with the entire group. He said, Thor, we're in competition with one another. Why would I share my best practices? Wrong answer. I was a fighter pilot. There's no more competitive group in the world than fighter pilots. But you know the first thing I did when I found out a new technique or something that I knew that made me more capable in the sky? I shared it with everybody on the team because I wanted to make sure that they were as capable as possible so we had the best team and the best business as possible. And that's because our leaders ingrained in us the fact that if the entire team doesn't succeed, we don't succeed as individuals. And we're constantly fighting to do well enough to go to Top Gun or get the next great assignment or get the next rank. But at the same time, I cared more about the team improving than my own individual improvement. And it's not because we're just selfless people. It's because that's a culture that was created within our organization. Another quote that we heard was, debrief? We don't debrief. That's from everyone in every sales organization. I've never talked to a sales organization that says, yep, after every sale, good or bad, we do a debrief, we identify the root cause, we leverage the new best practice, I teach the new team members how to use this new technique, or we eradicate this mistake. And you may be thinking of one time that you debrief, but I challenge you and I'd say that the time you're thinking of is probably the train wreck, right? In other words, somebody's job was on the line, and now we're figuring out how did we end up in a place where we lost that big deal, that huge $20 million opportunity isn't here anymore, and the boss wants answers. And so finally, we're doing a debrief so that we can make sure the finger's pointed in the right direction when the dust settles. That's not a real debrief, folks, and that's certainly not the culture I want to be a part of. I want to figure out how to scale and leverage best practices to improve the entire group. And sure, eradicate mistakes too, but I don't wait until a train wreck occurs to start the first debrief. So here's a slide that I've showed in the past that says how well organizations plan, brief, execute, debrief. Where does this come from? Well, Afterburner's been around for 20 years now. We've helped out more than 3,000 companies, and we've helped out more than 1.5 million people at those companies. Every industry you can think of, every continent on Earth, I guess besides Antarctica. And the most significant thing that comes out of these sessions is that debriefing is always the lowest ranked. In other words, these folks say, we're terrible at debriefing. On a scale of 1 to 10, about a 3.5 to 4 is how well we debrief. And if you're seeing that and thinking, well, the pressure's off, I don't debrief well either, I guess the rest of the market doesn't, I challenge you because that number's on the rise. If you were to ask me this question 2 years ago, if you were to see this slide 2 years ago, it would have been about 2.5. That's because the smart companies, the right companies, the ones who are doing it well, are debriefing. They're creating more agile environments all across the organization. So people are seeing the value in debriefing and what it can bring to the table. What can it bring your team? Well, this is a great meta-analysis that was conducted with over 40 Harvard Business Review studies and shows that from looking at NFL teams, other elite military teams, and business teams, where they would debrief and figure out how much better the team would be afterwards and how much greater chance of success that they had. And here's the great information. If they just did an unstructured debrief, even they said, what should we continue doing, stop doing, or start doing, their chances of success at the next mission, the next sale, the next quarter rose by 22%, just by an unstructured debriefing. Now we structure that debriefing, and you use Afterburner's methodology, the methodology that was determined by fighter pilots and written in blood because it was for our survival that we had to develop it. Now that structured debriefing increases your chances of success up to 38%. You bring in a third-party facilitator and ensure you're having that person facilitate the conversation, it's going up an additional 27%. So we're seeing that the debrief can really take your organization to new levels. Here are the keys to the debrief. Number one, start with a win. We talked about it already. Don't debrief the train wreck. Don't tell me about the thing that went terribly. Start with a win. We did this last week, like I said, with the sales team that was doing fantastic. You think it was hard for them to debrief? You think they had to overcome a culture of sharing their best practices? Of course not. They're excited to. I mean, we're talking about how great they are. So very happily, this team said all the things that they were doing well and all the things they had changed to be more effective. That's a lot easier conversation to have. That's a lot easier first debrief than talking about something that didn't go well. Next up, if you're in an organization like the one I described earlier where the senior vice president said, hey, we're all competitors, I'm not going to help you out, and I'm here to win. Well, start off the culture the right way. Share your lessons learned. And just saying, yeah, but Thor, I'm not giving it away. If I'm in the culture that's dog eat dog and we're all fighting and it's cutthroat, why would I share my best practices? That's the best opportunity because now you're going to show that A, you're selfless, B, you can scale success. It's not just about your own individual success. You can show others how to succeed as well, which is really what leadership is about. You can make yourself competitive for those leadership positions. And then C, you're increasing the performance of the team and showing the team a new way to exist. And the last thing I tell you for your debrief, make the application of those new techniques simple as possible. And you can't just say, hey, my lesson learned was we got to communicate better or we got to be more organized as a sales team. Everybody knows that. I'm talking about very specific checklist style lessons learned that you can share with the entire group. And this is not 5 pages long. Just keep it down to 5 items. We shared lessons learned with a sales team yesterday responsible for about $1.5 billion of sales annually for this group. And the lessons learned we shared was a 5-item checklist. But the people that saw it said, hey, that's going to help me immediately. It was simple. It was intuitive. It was something that a lot of folks weren't doing. We're able to very quickly change behaviors for the entire team. So that's it. Plan, brief, execute, debrief with your sales teams. Plan to build that alignment. Plan to build that collaboration. Plan so that you have something to walk in the door with besides the school of hard knocks from your last attempt. Brief it to kick off the execution phase. Go out there and execute as a team, and then conduct a debrief. So here's how we recommend you apply flawless execution to your sales teams. Create and establish an execution rhythm. Meaning you have a rhythm with your team, you're meeting with them on a weekly basis, maybe it's daily, maybe it's bi-weekly. You never cancel that meeting. You're always looking at the same data. Simplicity beats complexity. Keep the data simple and transparent. We could all build a spreadsheet and wallpaper our rooms with all the information available to us, right? You can go into Salesforce, you can go into Excel, you can build out all these different metrics. But at the end of the day, nothing's going to make us any better than a simple approach and a simple objective for that team. And then finally, create alignment. How should you apply this if you've already got an existing sales model? I say that's even better. What do I mean by that? Well, here at Afterburner, we use a couple of sales models. We use SPIN because I'm trying to always find your implicit need that you have as an organization. Where do you need the most help? We use Challenger Customer, which means we are always looking to be a coach or a teacher, and that's a model that says that we can help organizations not just by listening, but by coaching them as well. And then Challenger Sales, which says that there's many different points of sale within an organization. Now, the complex sales are meaning that we have 5 points of contact that we need to maintain within every single organization. But none of those techniques, those very technical approaches to selling, creates a better team. You need to use flawless execution, an iterative model to make your team better each time, to iteratively improve your skill sets, to share your best practices, to standardize those things that are working within the team, to standardize behaviors. So here's our call to action. Next steps. If you're saying, okay, I'm bought in, what do I do though? What do I do tomorrow? This all seems great, but how do I actually apply it? Next time you do a client visit, I want you to do the following. First of all, I want you to plan with your team. And if it's going to be a little bit of an awkward conversation at first, when you say, we're going to plan, they're going to say, what do you mean plan? We never plan, we just go. You say, well, just humor me, sit down, and let's talk about this. What's our clear objective that we've got as a team? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the few steps? And we don't have to come up with 75 steps, but what are the few steps during this client interaction that we're going to take to achieve that objective? And the objective isn't always a sale, right? In these complex sales, we know the sales cycle sometimes is lengthened out to months, sometimes years. And if that's the case, then I'm just looking for an objective that shows me that next advancement. Brief with your team. That means you take the plan you created and get a quick huddle and say, all right, team, here's what we're planning on doing. Here's what we agreed to. Bill, here's what you're going to do when we walk in. You introduce us to the team. Sally, you're going to start it off with the first 3 slides and have a conversation with the person and talk about their kids. And then, Bob, you're going to finish it off and ask for that next advancement at the end. Ready, break. All that planning information is front of mind. We're ready to go execute and ready to take on that mission. Now, when you execute, have that contingency plan so that you know when you show up and the mission at the meeting that was supposed to last 30 minutes is cut down to 15, we've got a contingency plan that says, all right, here are the key things that we're going to talk about in the 15-minute session, in the truncated version of that sales pitch. And then finally, debrief. At the end, have a discussion about what went well. And here's what's going to be exciting. You started with a plan. You started with an objective. So now you're able to actually debrief towards something. So when you get back in the car, and by the way, most of these things can be accomplished in the car, on the way there and on the way back. You're going to say in the car, all right, so we had the objective. Did we meet our objective? It was very clear. And it wasn't just to do well. It was to make the next advancement. Did we meet that objective, yes or no? Talk about how things went versus the plan. Talk about best practices. What should we share with the other sales teams when we talk to our regional sales director later on? And then what are the mistakes that we don't want to make again? And then last, I want you to tell us about it. Write us at Afterburner and share us that information. We love hearing about it. We trade these stories all the time, and we're very often asked questions or have folks bring challenges to us that they ran into and help them through those as well. All right, at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions around the room, and we'll discuss how to create high-performing sales teams using flawless execution, and what are the key challenges you can think of right now. So what would be the most challenging aspect of doing this with your team? All right, we've got 5 questions already. It looks like the first one is from Sally, and Sally says, my team is a mix of new hires and experienced salespeople. How can I get them all on the same page? Great question, and it's a very common challenge. So basically, we've got experience level here. We have our salespeople are very good at what they do. We have our experience level that's here. They're just new. They don't have the experience level of the rest of the team. How do we close that gap with the team, or how do we create an aligned plan? Well, I'll tell you, this is the most important time to create an aligned plan. And from our perspective, there are many times when I'm flying with a veteran pilot who's been doing this for 20 years and a new wingman. And it's through the flawless execution cycle that, as fighter pilots, we're able to accelerate the learning for those new wingmen as quickly as possible. Because when we go back in that debrief and in a nameless, rankless fashion talk about what we all could have done better, then we're challenging those new team members very quickly, not just by saying, hey, do better, meet your quota, work harder, but by saying specifically, here are the lessons learned for what you need to do differently next time. That's how you become more effective. And the other thing is, we're going to have veterans on the team that are trying as hard as they can, but not improving because they aren't being challenged. They aren't being told through a debriefing setting how to get better. The debrief is going to solve that as well. So the debrief is another great opportunity to not only improve the new team members, but the veterans as well. How do I incorporate this into my current sales process? Does it replace it? No, it definitely doesn't replace it from my point of view. And even here at Afterburner, as I said earlier, we use a couple of sales models in terms of sales approaches where we help our valued clients to find out the greatest need that they have, to articulate that need with them, and to make sure we come up with a solid plan to serve that need. But we use flawless execution to power the team behind it. In other words, spin selling is great to find the explicit need and develop that with a client. Challenger customer is great for developing your coach mentality and having that type of relationship with your client and providing holistic solutions for them. And that's all well and good, but we need something that's going to power that in the background. We need to make sure that we're capturing the best practices. Because the worst thing we can do is just learn through the school of hard knocks along the way. My sales team spends most of their day on the road. How can we use these techniques to work for us? Great question. Now, I'll go back to what I said a little earlier. This happens all the time. Everybody's remotely dispersed, right? And I know you feel like you're the only ones who are facing that challenge. Everyone's all over the globe now. Everybody has 2 team members in Ireland and 2 team members in Asia and 1 in Australia, and we got to get on the phone together with everybody, and we're sending emails at weird hours of the night. Everybody's dealing with that. But here's the good news. Set a weekly session with these folks, stick to it, have these conversations with clear, measurable metrics that you're holding them to, with clear plans to get there, and then debrief with them, and you don't have to be in the same room. So for this company that we were in Silicon Valley with, it's a $26 billion tech company, we supported about 70 different missions now from start to finish with this group. We had a 91% mission complete rate. I told you earlier, 33% is the industry standard. That's the first slide we started with. We're at 91% for this great company. Most of those missions were done with people that never saw each other past the planning phase. They got together in a planning phase. For 8 weeks, they went out and executed. They all did their individual sales, or there was a marketing team that did their own thing, remotely dispersed, even the legal team, the channel partners. They all did their own thing, all by themselves, and then would come back only for these WebExes or phone calls, and they still were able to maintain an execution rhythm. Next one says, my team's assignments projects often extend across several months. What are the best practices for debrief and or course correction along the way? Great question. So here's my ROE for a team in terms of execution rhythm. So for me, I flew every day, and so it's very easy for me to plan, brief, execute, debrief all in one day. Some of you may have that same execution rhythm. Some of you may have multiple missions in one day. If you're visiting 5 clients a day, then I'd recommend that you treat each of those like a mission. You do a quick little 5-minute planning session, you brief it up, you do a 5-minute debrief after that one, and so you have multiple sessions of plan, brief, execute, debrief every day. But if you're dealing with some complex projects, which is most often the case, that we're have to step in and help out with a complex strategic initiative that the team is pursuing, then I would tell you the following. Set up a mission objective that's around 6 to 8 weeks long. Why 6 to 8 weeks? Well, any shorter, and it doesn't feel like we're accomplishing enough. Meaning, if I have to bring all those people in from all the other continents and get them together in one place, then I want to make it worth our while, and I want it to be something that I really feel like I'm moving the needle on the strategic objective. And 6 to 8 weeks is about the minimum amount of time for us to get that feeling. Anything more than 6 to 8 weeks, and we're running the risk of things changing too much in the market environment, things changing too much within our company, people coming, people going, we're crossing over too many holidays, too many PTO periods, somebody gets sick, all these things that are going to change in our environment, and our plan is going to have to be adapted to such an extent that it's going to look very different from the original one we created. In other words, we lose predictability if we go too far outside of 6 to 8 weeks. That's my advice on that one. Next up, I work in the legal department and work closely with sales. Everyone has a different version of the paperwork they turn into me. How can I standardize this process and make it more efficient? Okay, that's a great one. So bottom line is this. So what I'm hearing there is that I work in the legal department and I'm trying to, outside of my sphere of influence, try to influence this other group, the sales team members, and make sure that they're standardized in their execution. This is a great question, and we get this one all the time where team members are saying, look, the other example we hear all the time is we're in sales and I don't have the marketing support I need. Or I'm in R&D and I don't have the sales team that's aligned with me along the way. How do we create that? Folks, the way we need to create that is one level higher than your group, meaning we need to get alignment from the leadership. So we're working with a med device company where they have a marketing team that's not quite aligned with the R&D team, that's not quite aligned with the sales team, and they're kind of bickering and fighting over who should be in charge of this particular mission. And so what we had to do is say, we're going to bring the president in, and he's going to tell you his unique vision for this, his strategic version of what the finished house looks like, so that the carpenters and the bricklayers and the people who put the landscaping up all know exactly what their role looks like and what the finished product looks like. Because we have to start with the end in mind. So when you have a group that's dispersed, you're working across the functions, then you need to start with the end in mind and determine what are the intended effects that we're trying to create. Next up, do you feel that there needs to be alternative plans depending on the generation of your salesperson, i.e. Generation Xers versus millennials? Great question. I would tell you that, the challenge, if I'm reading into your question, the challenge you're saying is that, how do I do this with millennials? They're stereotypically, they're a little bit more touchy-feely. They need to have collaboration and buy-in to a greater level. And I say, fantastic. That's exactly the type of team member I want. Because if I can build that buy-in, then I'm going to be that much more successful during the execution phase when I don't have time to walk around and continue, re-articulating why this one's important. So the key to working with millennials is the following. Lean on them in the planning phase. During the planning phase, make sure that you have their 100% alignment, that they've got their fingerprints on the plan, that they've rolled up their sleeves, they're a part of that, because that's when you're going to get the disciplined execution from them on the back end. And that really applies to everybody, but millennials in particular, who need to have that alignment and that buy-in up front, the planning stage is so critical to include them and to make sure that you have the, yep, we're a go, I'm fully on board with this, and I fully get why, the key word being why, this is so important. All right. Next one. Looking forward to having Afterburner here in Phoenix on December 6th. Looking forward to coming out there as well. Thank you. What sales industry has your method been most successful in? How many customers does the industry service? So what sales industry have we been most successful? I would say the most successful one, the one I got most excited about was the one I showed you up front, where it was tripling the sales revenue and pipeline for Europe for this particular company in the tech industry. And this is their flagship product. In other words, this is a company that's saying, hey, we're going after our second act of innovation. And if you know anything about tech, that's pretty hard to do, because that first act of innovation is traditionally, that's what propels the company into an existence, but then it's kind of hard to go explore and go find that next opportunity and have that great new creative surge with your team. And this is what they're going after, and they have that product. And they finally got it. They put in all this work to create the next iPhone, quote unquote, and they found the great product, and it's sticking in North America, but it did nothing in Europe. And they waited, and it did nothing the next quarter. And they sent them over white papers on how to sell this from North America, and it did nothing with their team members. And they talked to the salespeople in Europe, and they say, hey, we're trying to sell it, and that just is not working. I don't know what's going on. I guess we lagged the tech industry in the States. And we went over there and had a candid conversation with them, and they said the following. They said, yeah, we're trying to sell it, but you know what? I sell the old product a lot easier. I've got a quota to make. So I focus on selling that old product. If I got enough time left over, sure, I'll try to sell this new product that they say is so great. But I don't really know how it even works in Europe yet. We've got all these different use cases that don't really apply on our side of the pond. And so I'm going to wait until I get better support from the sales team, from the marketing team, and from the leadership back home in North America. And so what we did is we debriefed with the team, we voiced all those concerns, and we got the alignment we needed, showed them why you can't just focus on the previous product, incentivized their behavior towards the new product, taught them better use cases, taught them how to position it in their market. Of course, we had a couple of successes right out the gate, and mostly failures, because that's the way new sales will always go. And you celebrate those successes, and you go debrief with those people and say, how'd you do it? No one else is doing it. You did it in Sweden. What happened? And they'll tell you the examples and their best practices. Share that with everybody across Europe, and then sure enough, a quarter and a half later, they had tripled their revenue, and they're hitting more than the numbers that they were going after initially. That's probably the biggest one that we went after. In terms of dollars, that was about 20 million. What other questions do we have? Let's see. Next one. Great info. Will you send the slides out after the presentation? Absolutely. We'll make all that stuff available and allow you to see this in the future. We'll even send out a recording of this if you want to share this with your teams. Shoot us an email. We'll give you that on the last slide there. Follow-up. Have you had success with companies that sell and deliver hard goods, like the beverage business? Will there be where there are many similar products? So I'm hearing what you're saying. You're saying, well, what if there's a highly competitive nature in this business? And now I'm faced with, I'm Coke and Pepsi, and I really haven't differentiated enough to be able to sell it any differently. And how do I create success in that world? Once again, I'm going to say that somebody is successful on your team. somebody is doing it the best. Just by default, somebody's going to be doing it better than the rest of the team, right? Debrief with them. Go sit down, have a discovery conversation, find out what their execution rhythm looks like. How are they positioning the product differently to the market? How are they internally managing their team differently? What's their execution rhythm look like? You don't have to copy everything. What you're looking for are those root causes for success. If you can scale and leverage those root causes for success, that's what allows you to standardize the winning behaviors to the rest of the teams. I mean, that's really what it comes down to for us. My airplanes don't look that much different from the airplanes that we have across the pond in the other countries. Our missiles don't look that much different. We had to figure out ways to be more effective in the cockpit and to scale the best practices so that we can be on the winning team. Got about 5 minutes left. Next one is, what's the best tactic to motivate my team to cooperate and work together? So if I'm hearing you right here, you're saying I have a typical sales team. I've got a lot of type A personalities. They really like going after their own individual numbers, and they are not going to be real excited about this whole team and touchy-feely, fuzzy, we're all in this together kind of perspective. Well, that's your job as a leader. And so what I tell you is this: you need to build that picture for them. Once again, you're going to come back to the why and teach them what we're collectively building together. If all you ever talk to me about is my quota and whether or not I met that and whether or not I made my annual numbers, and you fired the guy who didn't make his annual numbers, well then sure, I'm going to be pretty incentivized to just focus on myself. But if you're telling me what we're building together, and if you're telling me what next year's going to look like if we as a team rise to the occasion, and if you're showing me what the team is doing along the way, and if you're sharing with me what Bill and his team did fantastic over here, and we have someone like Josh who's even willing to stand up and say what mistakes he made along the way, well then I'm a lot more excited to be a part of that group instead of just pursuing my own goals. So you have to rise above the human tendency to just focus like a laser beam on those numbers and quotas and things that are real short term and that we're trying to make in the next couple of weeks in our quarter, and talk about what are we really building together as an organization. That's when you get folks that are passionate about what they do, and that's when you get folks that work together as a team. All right, we got a couple more questions. I don't think we're going to have time for any more. At this point, we'll answer every other question that we got, either via email or over the phone. I want to tell you that we got a next webinar kicking off, our strategic planning webinar series. And the reason I think you'll love this is because of what we finished our conversation with here. This takes it from a technical level about how do I meet my goals and telling you why you should meet your goals. What's the finished house look like? Why do I need to know that? How do I communicate that to my team? How do I get inspired alignment with them to create the disciplined execution on the back end? So that's what strategic planning is all about. It's about determining what the finished product, the intended effect is up front so we can be as effective as possible. And next, we're going to talk about the 10 things you must have in place to start strategic planning right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining our Flawless Execution webinar series today to discuss how to create high-performing sales teams. As always, we're available by phone. You see our phone number up there to discuss any further questions, as well as my email. Email me directly. I always get 100 emails after this. I answer every single one of them, and I love it because I love hearing about what challenges you're facing, and even better, when you apply this and it's worked well. So email me your questions. Email me anything you got, Thor@Afterburner.com. Follow us on Twitter @Afterburner Inc. to keep the discussion going as we share more on high-performing sales teams and business insights. Thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to connecting with you further. See you, ladies and gentlemen.